so much stuff floating around. I don't know. People trying to say they wasn't together.
Basically was trying to get into a threesome. What's going on, ladies and gents? Welcome to another experience known as Kay and Manny. I am the one they call Manny. She's the lady of all K's. And today we're still doing our part called Till Death Do Us Part. And we have a special guest in the building.
Yes, we do. I have the pleasure of bringing this beautiful lady joining us today. She wears multiple hats. Oh my gosh. And one thing that I love about Heidi is that, she stands firm on her word. So everyone, please help us introduce Pastor Heidi Mercado. Welcome, Heidi.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Kalima and Manny.
You're very welcome, Heidi. Today is kind of like a relaxed day because it's 11 a.m. on a Saturday and people are watching. But we still want to bring forth a powerful word to you today. But we're in relaxed mode because you know why we're in relaxed mode? Because today we're going to be talking about the power of intimacy and how it's so important and it plays a big factor in the marriage bed, in the marriage, relationship. So one of the first questions, Heidi, that I wanted to ask you is, do you feel a marriage can survive without intimacy?
Wow, that's a good question.
Right.
My first instinct would say no. You need intimacy.
Absolutely.
It is necessary.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how the importance of it. Let's talk about and what does it bring, to the marriage?
Yeah, definitely. I would have to say that, mainly the first reason why intimacy is important. It's a two-way street, right? In a marriage. So we want to be sure that when we are in a marriage and a relationship that you are giving what you would like to receive. We are human beings that desire to be intimate, which means that we are to be intimate with our spouse because we know that our spouses want to be intimate with us. So it's reciprocal. It's supposed to be a two-way street. It's not supposed to be that I love you, I care for you, but I'm not getting nothing in return. So it's supposed to be reciprocal. So the importance of intimacy is not only sharing in what's the obvious, right? Physical, which is absolutely necessary. It's necessary because God ordained it to be so when he told Adam and Eve in the garden, right? He said, be fruitful and multiply. You cannot be fruitful and multiply if there's no intimacy, right? So intimacy is actually commanded by the Lord. He desires for those who are in a marriage, in a union that have decided to come together to become one. So to become one means to be intimate.
Right. And just to give everyone some type of clarity, because some people don't even know the true meaning of intimacy. So Heidi, what is your definition of intimacy?
Wow, that's a great question. I really believe that intimacy, along with, being physical, having that emotional intimacy, having that open communication intimacy, having that, we respect each other and we set boundaries because it's going to create the deeper parts of intimacy. It's going to be so much better when you have everything else that's prerequisite to get to the deeper parts. So what am I saying by that? You can't get into intimacy unless you have already set some things in line prior so that you know how you're going to go forth in your marriage and everything that you do. So I'll give you an example. Like my husband and I, we've been married for about 13 years. Wow. And we have decided from day one, things that we will do and things that we won't do. That creates intimacy. Why? Yeah. Because we know our boundaries, we know our limits, we know where we won't overstep. When we know that ahead of time, then you can have an intimacy. You can have an intimacy in your conversations. You can have intimacy in just being together without being physical. And then, of course, when you are physical, when you are in having intimate relations, there's a deeper intimacy because you're one, you're connected in body, mind, and soul. So it goes just beyond all the other things that we see with the eye. It goes deeper into what you don't see. Absolutely. I would even suggest that is something that's spiritual, the intimacy. You can be with your spouse in a place, and you and your spouse can just look at each other because there's an intimacy within each other that you know of that nobody else knows. That's intimacy, because nobody can tap into your intimacy with your spouse.
I love that. And as you was talking, it popped into my head that, I just wanted to say a little nugget to the men, especially if you feel like you are struggling in this area. See, sometimes, like you said, they think it's just physical, but you just pretty much broke it down. It's emotional. And for a female, because we feel like we do so many things and we wear multiple hats, we really need you to come in and understand that, by helping us, especially helping us in the household, that does so much for a woman's mindset, because she has 1,000 things on her mind. So fellas, if you can just even help your ladies get to that, comfort zone. Oh, you know what? I know he's going to step in and help. That makes her feel a lot better, because, later on, you want her in that alone space. But by the time you get to that alone space, it has to lead up. Like you said, it has to lead up. What are you doing throughout the day? So when you get her in that alone space, she feels ready and she wants to, open herself up to you.
Exactly. And I love that you're saying that, because that's one of the things that my husband and I were so big on. Because we're a team, we can see if we're tired. So I'll give you like another example. If he comes home from work, right? But he knows that I've been home all day with Hannah, our 2-year-old, right? Which can be pretty exhausting, taking care of a toddler, right? So let's just say normally the house is clean, but let's just say he walks in and it's not completely clean. He will take that into consideration and say, well, I know my wife's been home with our daughter. Let me go ahead and make life easy for her and begin to clean. So my husband will come home after working an 8-9 hour shift. And if he sees something that's dirty, he'll begin to clean. Why? Because in our intimacy, he knows that I needed that so that I can be at peace. Because guess what's going to happen later? If I know that there's nothing left to do, I'm free from my husband.
Right.
Intimacy in any area that you want to name it. You understand what I mean?
Right.
Right.
And I think it takes a mature person to do that, because some men have the mentality, oh, I came home and the house is not clean. Instead of saying, you know what, like you just said, Stephen identified, she got our 2-year-old. She's probably been, studying, and she's also running the business. You know what, let me just step in, because, I'm just going to do. And that's what we want. We just want you to step in and do. Now, Manny, what you got to say?
I'm sitting back listening to both of y'all, to be honest with you, to talk about intimacy. Sorry. Now, Heidi, I do wanted to ask this question. You mentioned different types of intimacy, such as emotional, physical, and everything in between. Talk about some of the behaviors that may rob intimacy from a marriage.
Wow, some behaviors that may rob intimacy from a marriage. That's a great question. I think the lack of communication. I think when one spouse may not be sharing everything to their spouse, I think that is the beginning of allowing anything to come into the marriage and will rob the intimacy. Why? Because in order to become one, there has to be transparency. There has to be an honest relationship where I'm sharing with you, you're sharing with me. I know how you feel. You know how I feel. When we know how we feel, we can understand each other and we can come to a mutual understanding. Once we have that mutual understanding, then we know that we're not going to allow anything to come rob the intimacy. So I would definitely have to say, Manny, that the lack of communication of anything, it can be something so small, but anything that is not exposed is something that will just remain around and it will rob the intimacy.
Now, once it's been robbed, well, let's play devil's advocate.
Ooh.
And I'm good at that. Say, for example, a couple or something happened and then the intimacy is out the window. What can you do to bring it back?
So, yeah, wow, that's a great question. I would definitely have to say that the only way to go from being in a position where the intimacy has left to bringing it back is, again, sitting down and communicating.
Mm-hmm.
So I can speak from a woman's perspective, not necessarily a man. A woman desires to be heard. A woman desires to be validated. A woman desires for her spouse to let her know, I hear you, I feel you, I understand what you're saying. So bringing that back in would be the first step, is that both parties will come and sit down together, having been that they have realized that intimacy has been robbed and gone. So how do we bring it back? Let's talk. Let's go into those areas that what was it that caused, first of all, the breakup of the intimacy? What happened? Let's go back to that. And I know some people may say, well, I want to go backwards. Well, sometimes you got to go back to pick up something in order to go forward.
Yes.
So I would definitely have to say that sitting down and discussing, let's go back to where it was and what happened. And let's figure out now how we can get better from that point so we can get our intimacy back in place.
And I want to piggyback, guys, and help me out. I can't think of the name of this movie, but it was a story about a husband and a wife, and you can tell there was strife in their relationship. And I think at one point, the wife just gave up. So the man went to his father, and the father gave him advice, and he's like, you want your wife? And he said, yeah, I want your wife. He said, so fight for your wife. So the father just tell him, do something every day. So I think for the first week, he was doing something every day, and she was just like rebuttaling. She wasn't budging, right? And he was getting so frustrated, and he went back to his father, and he said, it's not working. And his father laughed at him. He said, it's only been a week. He said, keep doing it, right? So the wife, she put herself in a position where she checked out and she was seeing someone. So he knew, but he was still trying to get his wife back. So he was consistent for 30 days. He went a little bit longer than 30 days, right? And then she started to take notice. She started to smile again. She started to look at her husband a little bit different. And I'm saying all of this because sometimes it does happen. One might step, their mind, they didn't checked out, but one is still there. And that's why the vows are so important, because you chose this person to spend this lifetime with. So you made a commitment to fight and you put the work in, and it was able to reconnect. But so many people, they feel like, I tried and it was a month or two and she didn't, but like that, it's going to take longer than that, especially if there's damage there and you're the reason for the cause. And that's the thing. A lot of people don't want to take responsibility that they played the part, and they think someone's supposed to just budge. If it took a long time just to break, to get from that part, it's going to take time for it to get back. But you have to ask yourself, are you committed? And a lot of people don't want to be committed. They just want, and I think people just jump around. And that's why a lot of people don't get the satisfaction they need, because you're still jumping. Where's that contentment where you say, you know what, I'm firm in this. I'm firm in my marriage. I'm firm that I want this. I'm firm that she's the one. Where's that at? But it takes work and it takes practice. And another thing too, people don't put their practice to work.
Exactly. I completely agree. And it's interesting. So the movie that you're referring to is Bulletproof.
Yes, there you go. Yes. I couldn't think of it. Thank you. I love that movie.
Never seen it.
Yes, and they even had a book after that, which, let me tell you, in my practice and the work that I do with pastoral counseling and so forth, when I've sat down with many married couples, there was one time that was a book that I actually gifted to a married couple, and they did practice it and it did work. And I'm going to tell you why it worked. It wasn't because of the book. It's because of the content in the book, because love covers over a multitude of sins. So if you recall in that book, he kept showing the love. So even though she wasn't always receiving it, but the more he kept on showing it, the consistency, like you said, Kalima, was the key. Because if you really love someone and you are really committed, You're not going to find it a burden. You're going to keep doing what you know you're supposed to do as the other spouse, whether it's the wife or the husband.
Right.
Absolutely. And those are great advice and great words, ladies. And I wanted to switch gears real quick to a couple that are just in the dating phase. What advice can you give them to help grow their intimacy where it possibly could lead into marriage or lead into something that's very, very long term? What advice would you give to them?
Wow. So great question. So after being married 13 years, of course, I would have to say from my personal perspective is setting boundaries from the very beginning.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes when you meet another person you're dating, it's the fun stage. It's I find you attractive, you find me attractive, as we find each other so cute, right? So we miss the actual, and I don't want to say like we don't really show our true personalities or true colors, but let's keep it real. Because we're in the dating stage, we're not really being all of us.
Right.
Because there's some parts that we're reserving, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not showing everything. So I think the key is that you want to know the person when they're upset. That's a big one.
That is.
I have to see you upset. I have to see what's your anger level. If I can see your anger level prior to marriage, that'll give me, I would know, do I want to go forward?
Right.
Because let's say I see how he snaps. I see how, you know what I'm saying? You may not always see it, but the more you continue to date, eventually the way the person is, it will surface. You will see the true colors, the true personality that will come out. And I believe that those are essential in order to determining whether you want to go forward in a marriage or not.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately you want to, right? In my view, a marriage has to be healthy. Am I saying that it's going to be perfect? No, perfection is not healthy. What I mean is that you want to be in a marriage that you know that your spouse or, whomever you choose to marry, that their response in situations is going to be to a level where you can deal with. Are you willing to be with a person who snaps, who's angry, or who, is always yelling? Mm-hmm. Is that okay with you? Are you okay with that? Prior to saying I do.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? So I think that when you're in that dating stage, I think the best thing to do is to really continue to get to know each other, know what gets you upset. And guess what? You want to see them upset. You do. You do. Because you want to see their response. You want to know how they're going to respond when they're under pressure.
Right. I totally agree because you don't know how, because once you see them in a certain stage, you'll know how to react moving forward. Now, I'm always a firm believer of I have to see this person when they're happy, sad, angry, pissed off, whatever, because it gives me the mental note of how do I handle this moving forward? Or can I handle this moving forward?
Right.
Because a lot of times they get to that mode where it's like you're trying to harness King Kong. And you can't do that unless you have reinforcements. And unfortunately, when you have reinforcements to bring something down or bring that person back down to a normal level, then more than likely it's just like, okay, can I handle this moving forward? Because a lot of times, a lot of people can't do certain things. But at the end of the day, you have to know what your partner is and how your partner is going to react when it comes to certain situations. Kay, you got something?
Yeah, I said, and I wanted to piggyback because we're talking about the levels of the angers, right? And can we deal with it? But then I also know there's a space in there too that person has to take responsibility for their action, how they're feeling. And then the other person on the other side, the other spouse can be like, you know what, maybe what triggered that? Why are you there at that level? And can I suggest something to you? Can I suggest you go to counseling? And then, if that person is open-minded to, and you see them putting in the work and the action, then you be like, you know what? I might be able to, stay in this relationship because that person is putting the work. See, and that's the difference. You got to be with someone that's willing to put in the work. And that it just goes back and stands on what I said earlier. You have to see that because, we're all at different stages of our life. That can be the mate for you, but if they don't have certain things in order, you're not going to want to proceed forward with them. So I'm a firm believer, and I told you this before, Manny, I'm a firm believer on timing. You can meet someone, but it might not be the right time for you to pursue that relationship, but at least you can kind of have some type of substance how that person is, and then you're allowing them to grow and flourish.
Completely agree.
Absolutely. I mean, you just nailed it on the head right there, because a lot of times, and I'll speak for men. Sometimes men are not sure how to give intimacy because they only think of one level of intimacy, and I'm not going to say the word because I promised you that I was going to mention it, but it starts with the letter S, and it's just one of those moments where
we're grown here.
I know we're grown here, but I told you told me to act accordingly, so I'm going to honor that wish. But moving on, it's just more of and I'm speaking to the men. Men, know your partner. Know what makes her tick. Know what makes her upset and what makes her happy. Know her love language. I know we talked about it in a previous show. I'm not going to get too much into that. However, I do want to express to guys here, especially if you're single, know your partner and know what's good for them, because a lot of times, not everybody, if you feel like this relationship worked because of this, don't come into the next relationship thinking that same thing is going to work, because 9 times out of 10, it may not work, because they're two people are not created the same. Right. Let's be real. Not all men are created equal. I mean, even though that statement is very, very true in the matter of fact, but in the same sense, in this context, it is very true, because we tend to do the same things over and over thinking it's going to work. No, you have to evolve as a person, because that person is going to evolve as well.
Absolutely. And I think also too, Manny, too, I just want, I'm happy you spoke to the men real quick, but I also want to speak to the men too, that I think a lot of times they might be afraid of that word intimacy because, one, they didn't have the true definition, but Heidi, thank you for the definition. And two, they're not in tune with themselves, and, and they're scared because that requires them to open up and go to a new level. And, again, so many men carry the fear because, like you said, Manny, because of maybe failed previous relationships. But if you're going to meet someone new, you can't bring that same mentality into the new one. You have to give this person the time and the space. But over time, if that woman creates that space for you to feel comfortable, then I think that's amazing. And that's how most men know she's a keeper. That's like they always say, it doesn't take men that long to know she's the one, because I think that's one of the biggest things. If we create that safe place for him, he can appreciate that.
Exactly. That's the truth. I think that you totally hit it right on the nail when you said that. So even like with what Manny said, know your spouse. In this case, know the partner that you're intending on marrying, so much to the point that you know everything. I can't even stress that enough. You have to know what you're getting into before you get into it, to avoid from divorce taking place.
Right. Mm-hmm. And before we leave, guys, because we are running out of time, because this is actually a good segment, but Heidi, I just have to ask you one question, right? Sure. So, sometimes we all have long days where we're working. So how can someone create intimacy with their spouse during their day, during the work day, because they're not home yet? How do you give that? What is some advice or give an example that's something that you and your husband may do?
So creating intimacy. Oh, you mean so while he's at work and I'm at work?
He's at work and you're at work. Like, what are you guys are doing in between? Like,
so definitely, there's times that we would literally send each other some texts. So we would send each other some fun stuff. Okay. And I think you know what I mean, right? So, we would send each other some texts like, hey, I love you. I miss you. Those cute emojis. Keeping it PG. And I think that that definitely creates a kind of intimacy that when we know that we're both going to be off work, we're looking forward to seeing each other because we're not forgetting about each other throughout the day just because we're working. So we still stay in communication. We're still that couple that he'll get in the car to go to work and he'll call me like 5 minutes right after. Like, hey, everything's okay? I'm like, everything's fine. So I think just having that connection definitely creates that intimacy throughout the day.
I appreciate that because a lot of people feel like, oh, we have busy schedules, so we don't have time. So that's why I ask you, please provide that example because you have to get creative. You know, you really do have to get creative. You can't, and you also too, don't get to a place of contentment because then that gets boring. So you have to be able to spice up and you have to be able and willing to come out your comfort zone, but at your own pace because, you know, it feels good when you can move at your own pace. But with that being said, everyone, I appreciate you watching us this Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Continue to follow us here at the Lady K Chat Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify, and Apple, and all those wonderful social media spaces. Now, Heidi, if the people wanted to follow you, how can they follow you?
Well, they can definitely look me up. I am on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, definitely by my name, Heidi Mercado on Facebook. And on Instagram, you can find me at IamRise777.
And you also have a YouTube channel too, right?
I do. Yes, I do. And definitely you can find that under Rise.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kalima and Manny.
You're welcome on Kay and Manny. Everyone, thank you for listening. Have a great night. And don't forget to visit our website at www.ladykkenterprisesinc.com. And we'll see you next Saturday here at 11 a.m. Lady K.